All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is Chris Minter, and welcome to our webinar describing the changes to commitment control for budget period 2018. I hope everyone can hear okay. I guess if you can't hear, you're never going to hear what I'm saying. But for those of you who might have any kind of technical difficulties or anything comes up, we will be posting this webinar as well as a guide up on CC Info that you'll be able to search on. So, go out and tell your friends if they're not attending this webinar. So today, like I said, I'm Chris Minter. We also have Nicole Shevik here in the room. She's a business analyst for ConnectCarolina, doing lots of budget stuff. And we also have Henry Price, which I'm sure some of you know. He's a budget officer with the Budget Planning and Analysis Group there. And here's the webinar format. For those of you who have actually done webinars before, I'm sure you're going to be kind of used to this, but just to kind of refresh everyone's memory, I'm going to do a whole presentation about all the changes that are happening to commitment control, and then we're going to have a Q&A at the end. But you don't have to wait to the end of the webinar to ask your questions. So there's a chat window. You'll probably see it there in the bottom left-hand corner of your window where you can type in questions. And then we also have Rebecca Jones here in the room, and she'll be taking down your questions. And at the end, she'll go ahead and read those questions off, and then we'll try to have Nicole or Henry do their best to answer anything that comes up. And like I said, we'll go ahead and post this webinar on CC Info. All right, so new and improved. What's new for budget period 2018? Well, the biggest thing, F&A, state, and the trust budget ledger groups have been combined into the new FAST ledger groups. So the ledger groups have actually been reduced, that's a good thing, from 18 down to 7, which will improve the system performance of ConnectCarolina. It's going to reduce how complex it is and the amount of data that needs to be stored, all sort of resulting in a better experience for you. So when you go to enter your budget journals and budget transfers, as well as you're going to be running budget inquiries in ConnectCarolina, those are going to change a little bit. So that's what we want to talk about today. And 9 of the state budget roll-up accounts have been removed to simplify budgeting. You'll notice a few minor changes in InfoPorte. It's not going to be, as evident when you go in there. We are going to show you a couple things that have changed that you'll need to be aware of. So you probably want to know, do these changes even affect me? Well, like I said, most of the changes are going to be behind the scenes. There's been a lot of effort that has gone into making these changes, but fortunately, you're only going to see it very little when you go into the system. But there are changes you got to be aware of in both ConnectCarolina and InfoPorte. If you enter budget journals or transfers, you're going to see 3 new ledger groups when you go to do that, and you're going to have to know when to use those. For those of you who run budget inquiries in ConnectCarolina, like Budgets Overview, you're also going to need to know how to use the new ledger groups, and you're going to need to create new inquiries for budget period 2018 and beyond. InfoPorte users, they're going to see some new filtering options when running reports on the main ledgers and transactions tabs. Okay, so what are the FAST ledger groups? So with the budget period 2018, as I said before, F&A, state, and trust has been combined into the FAST ledger groups. So FAST is going to stand for F&A, state, and trust. Hence the chalkboard example there. They're just all kind of smashed into the FAST ledger group now. So the 3 new FAST ledger groups broken down. So we have the one called FAST. That's going to be your F&A, state, and trust expense ledger group. FAST underscore PAR, that's going to be your F&A and state parent expense ledger group. And finally, FAST underscore rev, that's the F&A, state, and trust revenue ledger group. Most of the campus users are only going to use FAST and FAST underscore rev. FAST PAR is used exclusively by the Office of Budget Planning and Analysis, otherwise known as BP&A. So to break it down, there's 3 main things you really want to keep in mind when you're doing budget journals and transfers for budget period 2018 and beyond. One is if you're budgeting for F&A, state, or trust funds, be sure to use one of the new fast ledger groups. Simple enough. 2, now this might seem a little weird for you, but even for your trust funds, when you go to select the parent budget entry type, you have to make those match, even though you guys know that trust funds don't have parents. You just kind of have to go with it and select them both. And I'm going to show you how you do that in the system. And then 3, and this is something you really need to remember because the system will actually let you do it, which we don't want you to do, but you don't want to combine F&A, state, and trust fund budget lines on the same budget journal or budget transfer. As I said, the system will let you do it, but it's not going to get as far as you think. All right, and another important reminder going along with this while we're kind of going through our transition, prior to July 1st, you're still going to use the existing F&A and state ledger groups for budgeting for budget period 2018. Those budget journals and transfers will be converted to the fast ledger groups the evening of June 30th. So when I go in to do my demonstration, you're going to see that in my screens, I actually have the new fast ledger groups. You're not going to have those yet. So you need to use the ones that are already out there. As far as trust budgets go, you're going to want to hold those off until July 1st. Don't do those yet. All right, so this is where we're going to kind of go into the system and really show you what this would look like. Now, there is a sort of assumption that you've done budget journals or transfers before, so I'm not going to teach you everything there is to do with budget journals and transfers. We've got books for that, we've got classes for that. So, hopefully you can follow what I'm talking about here, but I just wanted to go ahead and warn you about that. I'm not going to do the whole thing all the way through because that would take a while. So what we have here is we have a screenshot of a budget journal screen where I'm on the budget header tab. And, as you know, when you go to set out to do these, the very first thing you got to do before you do really anything is you got to choose the ledger group. So that's where you're going to see your major change here. So I'm going to hit the lookup for ledger group. And, if you look at this real quick, you'd probably go, oh yeah, this looks like it always does, except for, oh, there they are. There's your new ledger group. So that's what we want you to use for these kinds of transactions. So you'll see them there in the list. In my example, I'm picking FAST, the FAST expenses ledger. Now, one thing you'll notice is the generate parent budget checkmark box should already be checked for you when you go to do this. And like I said, even if you're doing trust, you still are gonna have to go in and make sure your entry types match. So that top box where it says original and that bottom box where it says original, those need to match. The other choices would be adjustment, but you have to make sure those match and everything is cool on this screen before you go on to do your lines. So moving on to the budget lines screen, once again, this screen is not going to look a whole lot different to you, except for when you go to look at the ledger. Okay, so instead of seeing like stat, or for state or something like that, because they're all mixed in together, you can't really see exactly what kind of funds you're using until you look at the line. Okay, so somebody has gone in here, me, and I've tried to do a budget journal for a state fund. I can tell because it has the 201. So really, that's the only difference. I mean, you're still going to do the lines the same. It's just that you're going to see that different ledger off to the side. Now, what can get kind of tricky is if I try to get fancy and I do 2 lines and everything's looking good. There's my expense budget ledger, and I'm putting in some funds. But if you're looking at it pretty closely, what you might notice that I did was I used that state fund on the top line, but oh, bad Chris, I used the trust fund on the bottom line. That is not what I'm supposed to be doing. Now, that will actually work in the system. Like I could actually budget pre-check this and submit it, and you'd think it was going to work, but ultimately denied. Hopefully someone's going to catch that and deny it back to you. So just save yourself the trouble of doing that. Don't try to get away with it. Go ahead and put it in the correct way and send it on through. But just wanted to make sure you're aware the system will not stop you from doing that. The way it's set up, you have to be aware of that yourself. All right. Along with that, when you are doing state budgeting, like in our example, there's one thing to be aware of. 9 of the accounts are being removed as budget rollups. So for those of you who've been to our classes, or maybe you've downloaded this document, you've seen the accounts for state child budgeting. It's that blue and white striped document. It tells you, which accounts are your roll-up values. Well, 9 of those have gone away, and it's going to simplify things for you, because obviously if you got less accounts to budget on, there's less accounts to pick from, and it goes faster. So what this chart right here is trying to show you is the column on the left is showing the accounts that we currently have in 2017. They're going to go away. So as of July 1st, all those accounts in the left column are not going to be there anymore, and you're going to use the accounts on the right. So we've actually taken the ranges and moved them underneath those other roll-ups. And if this is, if you're kind of looking at this going like, what? We have a document that I'm going to point your attention to here at the end of the webinar that explains this in a little bit more detail. But the overall theme is you have less accounts that you're going to be budgeting on for your state funds. So that was doing budget journals and transfers. Let's talk a little bit about doing the budget's overview inquiry. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. When you want to see what your budget balances are and all those things in Connect Carolina, you got to do a budget's overview, and you go in there, and like one of the first things you're going to do is you're going to give it a name. I actually did that on the previous screen, but I just decided to call it FAST_ST, fast for my state expenses. You probably know that you can only use about 10 characters there, so this is not your best descriptor. So, I go over to this next box, and I put in exactly what thing's going to look at in that box. And then down here, I'm going to pick the ledger group. So once again, just like I showed you in the previous example, I got to choose the ledger group or the new fast ledger groups that I want to use. So I pick fast, and I come back out here, and there it is. I've selected it, and you can see that right below it, it even tells you that's the F&A state and trust combination there. Down here at the bottom, it's telling me that I'm using fast as my ledger group. You can kind of check your work to make sure you're looking at the right thing. And of course, I'll be doing this for 2018 as opposed to 2017, which we're doing now. All right, now the big thing you're going to really have to pay attention to is, in the past, if I was using like the state ledger group and I went in and just put my department number in there, it would just bring me back all my state funds. But because FAST is mixing them all together, you got to get a little more clever about this. And what I did here was, for the fund, I put in 201%. Now I could have typed in 20101 or any particular fund, but what I was trying to do here is I said, show me all the funds that begin with 201. So when you see a percent sign, that's a wildcard character. Incidentally, that's why there's percent signs in all the other boxes, because it means I haven't done any filters. So like for the account and source and program, it just says, I don't care what you bring back. It can be any of those. But now for the fund, it's going to be all my academic affairs related state funds, and it has to also be Department 318300.
Can I make a comment on that? Just on this screen, you'll notice, especially because we're doing a state expense example, you do now see cost code 1 as one of the chart fields on which you may search. That is there because we have combined F&A, state, and trust into FAST. And with trust funds, we do have a group on campus that budgets with cost code 1. So that is there, but you still have to be cognizant of the fact that, if you, just like today, if you were looking at trust, you wouldn't use cost code 1 unless you were a member of athletics. So you still, even though it's there, just be aware that that is intended for looking at trust funds that belong to athletics. That's not meant to be used for F&A and for state funds or any other trust funds for that matter.
All right, thanks, Nicole. All right, so I ran that report, and it looks pretty similar. We just wanted to point out that when I come back with the results based upon those criteria, that you will see the fast ledger group listed in the results. But you can see that it did the filtering correctly for me. All the funds begin with 201. They just happen to all be 20101s, but it could have been other ones. And you can see that all the departments are, well, actually it's 318.
Must have done percent when you did that.
Oh, okay, that's my bad.
Different screenshot.
Okay, different screenshots. So they should all be 318. Yeah, okay, you see what I'm doing there. But you do have to make sure that you get your filters in there correctly. And even me, who's supposed to know everything, apparently I didn't do mine all correctly on there. But you know, I think everyone gets my gist, right? You guys have seen me in class. I make mistakes all the time. I do it to show you what not to do. All right. So let's talk about program and cost codes budgets as it relates to the budget overview. So budgets overview for program and cost codes will display only budget balances now. Available budget is not going to reflect, I repeat, not going to reflect pre-encumbrances, encumbrances, and expenses. And you're going to need to use InfoPorte's program and cost code tabs to see the complete balances. And we're going to kind of segue over to InfoPorte here in a minute so you can kind of understand where I'm telling you to go. So what I did in this example is I actually ran an inquiry for program C1302 in budget period 2017. So this is what it would look like now if you did it. Your data might be a little bit different. I might be using a different system, but you would see a budget, expenses, encumbrances, pre-encumbrances, everything down there. So you can see in this example, we had a budget of $100. We spent way more than that, just a little over budget, and I can see what my available balance is. Now let's turn the page and look what this would look like for 2018. There's all that. So in 2018, there's my budget, there's my available budget. It's not taking into account all those other things. So if you went in here and you're trying to figure out what your available budget is, but people have been hitting that budget with all those aforementioned things, this isn't going to be a very good picture of what your available budget's going to look like. So this is where we want to go to InfoPorte to see a little bit more of that detail. So I'm going to do that here in just a sec.
So just want to make a comment about this because so many people on campus are not familiar with the program and the cost code ledger groups. And this is not anything to do with your F&A, your state, and your trust funds. This is a budget. In this program example, this is a budget that has been created for program C1302. And anywhere that program is used, regardless of the type of fund on which it's used, it's then recorded against the expenses for that program. So don't think that this in any way changes how you now go and look at, where program is used with F&A funds or where program is used with trust or with state funds. That is not changing. This is just if you had selected the program ledger group, the way Chris showed you in the list, he selected FAST to see FAST. You would be selecting program to look at the program budget. So just please be aware that this is not impacting how you're going to see program used as part of your other fund groups. This is if you were looking at it wholly in and of itself. Okay.
All right, great, Nicole. So as I said, let's segue over to InfoPorte because as I mentioned before, there are changes in ConnectCarolina and there's also some changes that you're going to see in InfoPorte. So I know most of you probably use both systems, so it's a good idea to take a look. So when you come in here, I mean, if you don't have an eagle eye, you probably think like, man, this doesn't look different at all. Except for, it's going to say fund type there. And if you're not even remembering what it used to say ledger. So it probably says ledger right now on your screen, but come 2018 here, it's going to say fund type. So that's the only thing you're going to see right off. If I click the fund type drop down, that doesn't look any different. You're still choosing F&A, state, or trust. So it's not a big deal. It's more of a cosmetic thing you're going to see there on the screen. Now, when I go in, I would still choose my 2 fiscal years. For state funds, you're going to choose this year and last year. I'm going to choose budget period 2018. I can choose, other options that are on the screen, but I just kind of want to point out the salient ones here. And then when I run my report and I get my results, the results are going to look pretty the same, for the most part, except for when you look on the chart field line, you're going to see ledger group FAST. That tells you, it's going to be F&A, state or trust, and, the whole story behind that. But that's what you're going to see differently in the line. So if that's the ledger roll-ups for the transactions tab, same sort of deal here. When you go in there, you might not even notice it if you weren't paying attention, but instead of saying ledger, it says fund type, same sort of deal. But here's the part you're going to see that's a little different. So when I actually click that drop down, one thing you're going to see is these are in a different order. And you can click those plus signs, right, to open up the different options under state, F&A, or trust. Well, if I do that and click the little state plus, okay, the options are basically the same things, but they've reworded them. So now you're not seeing all those abbreviations like stat underscore ex underscore, all those things, which I'm sure most of you have probably over time figured out what those all mean or looked in your book, but now you can actually read them. So it's going to be a lot easier for new people to go in there and figure out which one you want to look at. So in this example, I ran the results, and of course I can see that here in this column, I can see my actual ledger name. So it's the fast expenses budget ledger there. And I can see, they're all going to say fast here at the beginning of them. And then, of course, the main thing you're going to be able to tell the difference between the fund types is you're going to actually look at the fund code. So if you don't know your fund code, the way they work, the first 3 digits, and how it tells you where it's state funds or trust funds or F&A funds, I highly recommend you check out the Chart Fields 101 guide that's out on CC Info. It breaks down the entire chart field string. How does the fund work? How does the purpose code, the 2 digits on the end work? What are the sources that go with the funds? How does all that work? I mean, if you haven't ever seen that before, it makes it a lot harder to sort of figure out what's going on here. So that would be a valuable resource, especially now that we're changing over to these fast ledgers. All right, so in this example, we're going to look at how we would do things historically and what they're going to look like. Basically, when you do things historically, you're going to be going back to previous years. So in this example, I decided to do 2017, and I used January as my example. Really, it's just going to look like it does now. So instead of saying fast, you're going to see that old one that I said is a little harder to read, like stat underscore ex underscore ex. Many of us know that's going to be state. So one thing you really want to keep in mind is, because we're going to these fast ledgers doesn't mean they're going to go back and convert everything from history into fast. So when you go back previous to 2018, you're going to see the old ledger names. And when you're doing new things, you're going to see fast. All right. Finally, InfoPorte program and cost codes. So when we come in here, the big thing we want to talk about is revenue is now going to show in all the program and cost code tabs, the summary, the roll-up, the transactions, and the list sub-tabs you have there under program and cost code. I've got a little example here where we're going to use the roll-up tab, and I'm actually searching on program, and I'm specifically using program C1302. But any one of these examples, would apply to all those tabs. You're going to see the revenue on them. So when I actually run that particular report, the big thing you're going to see is there's now a column that says revenue/expenses. So depending on what kind of data you're looking at, it's either going to be the revenue or expenses. Revenue is now included, and you'll see this new column here on the tab. All right, so that's essentially all I have. We're going to do questions here in a minute, but before we open up the floor to questions, I wanted to show you where all these resources live. I know, like, you're probably sitting there and it's after lunch and you're like, well, that was a lot, I need to go over this thing again. So what we're going to do is we're going to have all of the stuff that we're doing today, the PowerPoint, the webinar recording. We're going to have that up on CC Info, hopefully by the end of today or tomorrow. I've already put up a guide up on CC Info. It's that first link you see there, commitment control ledger group changes for budget period 2018. That's actually already up on CC Info, and it summarizes all the things that I've just talked about today. So if you go to ccinfo, .unc.edu, and hopefully you guys have been there hundreds of thousands of times, because all we do is talk about that website. But if you go there and click in the search box, if you just type like the word commitment or type the word budget, and hit the enter key, when I tested it before I came in today, it was actually popping up at the top of the results. So you shouldn't have to dig down too far to actually find that document. And then, like I said, we'll also have this slideshow and this entire webinar recording out there. So if you want to listen to it again or you want to send it to all your friends, it'll be out there for you. All right, we are ready for questions now.
Can you explain more about how you would see balance for program code?
Sure. The place to do that really the only place to do that is going to be in InfoPorte now. InfoPorte will have the budget if one is established for a program code. And you guys know that if you want to budget on a program or any of the 3 cost codes, you have to actually enter a budget on those ledger groups. So if you enter a budget, you will see that in InfoPorte. You'll also see pre-encumbrances, encumbrances in InfoPorte. And then you're going to see expense and revenue. So what we're doing, the reason that the view looks so dramatically different, in Chris's example, we could see where we had pre-encumbrances, encumbrances, and expenses. There was a line for each of those as you looked at it this year. And then next year, those lines, they're not even there. They're not even on the page, much less showing zeros. And that's because they've been removed. This is one of our efforts to dramatically decrease the volume of transactions that we're writing to ConnectCarolina and that we're having to store. And so it's part of reducing that complexity. So you guys have seen on the ledger group matrix, which you received in your budget definition or in your budgeting classes, you may have never even paid attention to it, but we have a ledger group called detail. And it's something that, really, I think there might be a handful of people on campus outside of the building that I'm in here who even know that it exists. But it really is a reporting construct, and that's where we're going to get the information from your programs and cost codes. So because that information exists there anyway, we're pulling it from there. It's a lot of detail, but the point of it is you will be able to get a complete balance for all of your revenue and cost codes if you use the program cost code tab in InfoPorte. And also with this change, we're able to, because we're using detail as the reporting place to get that information for you, you're also going to get revenue. The program and cost code ledger groups, they're expense ledger groups. The same way you have a state ledger group and you have a state revenue ledger group, expense and revenue don't exist in the same place. And the program and cost code ledger groups were just for expenses. That's why we never had revenue available on the tab in InfoPorte. But because we're going to a different place for the information next year, you're going to be able to truly get a complete picture of your program and cost code activity. The changes that are coming into InfoPorte will roll out on 7/1. So you'll start to see the fund type that Chris showed you. You'll see that on July 1st. The changes that are in the program cost code tab, the difference of the column name changing from expenses to revenue/expenses and also including revenue information. You will see that on 7/1.
Another question came in just for clarification. Did I hear correctly that we cannot load fiscal year 18 trust budgets until after July 1st?
You did hear correctly.
Okay. Will there ever be options to enter budgets in program or cost codes?
You can still enter budgets in program and cost codes. That's not changing. Well, the only thing that's changing is that you will not be able to see pre-encumbrances, encumbrances, and expenses against those program and cost codes in the program and cost code ledger groups. But the budget works exactly the same on July 1 as it does today for programs and cost codes.
Okay, does anyone have any more questions? You got Nicole and Henry, captive audience.
Well, I have a couple of comments I'd like to make, that some thoughts I had as we were talking. One of the things, I just mentioned that you're going to see the changes coming into InfoPorte on July 1st. You will notice now, if you have a keen eye, that you can see the FAST and the FAST ledger groups now when you go into ConnectCarolina. So if you were to, look at the budget definitions, maybe you're just like a budget geek and think it's fun to check out the budget definitions, you would see them there now. So we actually moved those into production last week. They cannot be used. They're just sitting there hanging out for when we start FY18 business kind of mid-June, when we open up purchasing and whatnot for FY18. So just know that you'll see them there, but there's nothing, you can't use them yet. So did want to mention that to you. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the reason, I had someone ask me about this the other day, so I thought I'd mention it, and maybe Henry can speak to it more. But the reason that the instructions are to not mingle funds on a budget journal and transfer is really around business process. Do you want to speak to that, Henry?
Yeah, basically. So if you commingle those, just for instance, your F&A. F&A does not route to central office for approval. So if you're making an F&A transfer to another unit or within your unit, those you can approve and post yourself. Trust budget journals, those actually do route to accounting services. So we would want them to get all of their things without having to see, of course, the F&A example or even state on those. So we want those solely separated so they can have one lane or one idea of what they're approving. And then, of course, with state, if we're going to isolate the other two, based off what I just mentioned, we might as well keep going with the state. So that state, certain ones route to the budget office for the transfers, whereas all budget journals route to the budget office for approval. So with those transfers that do not route to us, again, there are certain ones that are contained within the non-personnel group, if you're transferring there, that you have to monitor and just post yourself. And then others that are affecting personnel or increase to personnel or decrease to overall personnel, with certain criteria, those will route to us for approval. So it's just basically the business process of who gets to approve what, who gets to post. And again, those are accounting services, budget office, and then certain ones you guys will do yourself.
The last thing I wanted to mention, and the only reason it's not in Chris's slides is because I forgot to tell him about it. But I think that some of you folks who are with the dean's offices in the schools will be particularly interested on this. Another change that is coming for next year is that we are changing the roll-up on fund for state funds next year. So what I mean is this: right now you have state parent, and it's going to be fast parent next year with state funds. If we were to turn controls back on, a transaction can potentially fail because there was not enough funds sitting in 20101 or 20110. And we're going to roll the fund up on state parent to just be 20100, so 20100. And whenever the budget office decides to turn controls back on state funds, and again, even though state and F&A are now part of fast parent, they can be managed as far as controls separately. So one can be controlled and one can still track without budget. But should the budget office, the Office of Budget Planning and Analysis, should they decide to turn controls back on state funds, instead of controlling at the detail fund, again, 20110, 20142, whatever the case may be, it's going to control at 20100. So that will make things a little bit simpler for our friends in the dean's offices around campus.
When should we expect the new budget upload templates to be available?
They will be available in early June. So I don't have a hard date on that, Laura, but I know that tentatively on a document somewhere it was in June, and they will be posted on Budget Planning and Analysis website where the current versions are now. You will have to use new templates. They'll be called FAST, so you'll know exactly what it is. But we'll make sure that whenever they are posted, that'll be part of the budget communications that are going out from the budget office. So they have a memo coming out in a week or two, I guess, and it'll be in that memo. Henry, make sure it gets in the memo.
Good save.
All right, other questions? Please ask your questions now. Give everyone just another minute here. If we don't see any questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But Like I said, we have Henry and Nicole to answer your questions that you may have about anything we've talked about today. Okay, well, it doesn't seem like anyone's got any additional questions, which I guess is a good thing, since it must means everyone is pretty straight on how to use these new ledger groups. But I just want to go ahead and end the presentation by reminding you that there's an overview document about the ledger group changes that is already on CC Info. If you just search either budgets, or if I type in like commitment and just hit search, it comes up first. We're going to put this webinar up there and the slideshow, so you should be able to see that pretty soon. Actually, Nicole looks like she has another thing to say.
Just one more thing. Hey, Beth, I see that you're on here, and I'm glad that Beth Malone, you're out there in the world. I bet you're the one who asked about the trust budgets. And I need to talk with you guys about student affairs. So if there are any other folks online from student affairs, because you guys you have your trust fund set to control, we actually will need to do something a little bit different with you. So if you want to square up with me offline, Beth, we'll talk about it. Your dates will be just a little bit different than the rest of campus for everything, for all other trust budgets. So if you do not work for student affairs, you will enter trust budgets on 7/1, or if they're associated, you'll wait for the trust roll to happen. Okay, and the trust roll will happen after the fiscal year closes. And then your trust budgets will be entered for you. If you work with student affairs and you are concerned particularly about a source that is a student affairs source, then your dates will be just a little bit different, and we'll get those entered in June for you guys so that you can actually do business on 7/1. But I'll talk to you offline, Beth, and hopefully we can get